The first thing I wanted to ask you about, a number of our viewers may not know what the Educopia Institute is, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your mission and what you hope to accomplish for your clients and the folks that you work with.
Absolutely. So Educopia is, above all else, it's a catalyst. It's designed to be a very lightweight, really lightweight nonprofit that binds together communities of people. So the majority of our work, the kind of line that really runs through everything we do is community facilitation, usually with cross-stakeholder initiatives, so really trying to bridge groups that don't talk regularly. And the impetus for founding it back in 2006 was a set of projects that we were working on at the time. At the time I was at Emory University, and so was the president of Educopia and its founder, Martin Halbert. And we had a number of really successful initiatives, and Emory was one of those special places. Not all places are like this, but we did a lot of collaborative work, and almost everything we did was kind of, it wasn't Emory-centric, it was very field-centric. And we kept running into the 2 to 3 year timeframes of grants, and we would just be getting the motion going, you know, really everybody's energy in, and get all the buy-in, and get everybody glued together. And then what? And so we decided we needed some sort of a lightweight center that could provide longer bonding between groups. And that's really the model that we've been practicing ever since. And a lot of it has grown out of sociological principles, et cetera. But we work with a number of different initiatives around libraries, archives, museums, publishing. You know, some of it in the academic sphere, some of it in the public space. A lot of fun.
That's great.
We're a weird little beast.
You also played a founding role in the Library Publishing Coalition, right?
Yes, and that's one of our affiliated communities.
Okay. So that explains that. Where do you think, after working with them and seeing them grow and change, where do you think they fit into the overall academic publishing landscape? Right.
So I think that they're a really crucial bridge player in the academic library or not academic library, but the academic landscape. The libraries that came together to found the Library Publishing Coalition, the way that we started that initiative, and it was something that really Charles Watkinson and others within the field were the linchpins that made this possible. They crossed paths with me. I've had a long and enduring interest in scholarly communications issues, and have been wondering when this kind of library publishing activity that I'd been very heavily involved in earlier in my career, when it would gel. And so what that community started with was a seed-funded project where 60 libraries came together and said, we care about this, and we care enough to put in either $5,000 or $2,000 a year to have voting rights and to have some say in the governance of the organization. And what I did was facilitate the process. So I had no vote. I was there to help glue everybody together. And what they decided their impact would be is to really play as a bridge between lots of different publishing groups. So I do get back to the question. I'll go on a tangent, but I will. And so from the beginning of the seed-funded project, which wasn't necessarily going to found an organization the way that it has, that was driven by the participants. But what we knew we wanted to do, and what everybody on that group wanted to do, is make sure that we were building connections with SSP, AAUP, ARL, all of the different players in the broader environment, Crossref, DOAJ. I mean, all of these spaces. And what makes the library publishing voice so interesting is that it is giving libraries more exposure to the problems that are happening on the other side of the industry. So for a long time, the libraries were kind of the recipients of the problems in their own eyes, which wasn't, it wasn't really the case, but that was how it felt from the library perspective. There was a very library-centric view of how publishing and the cost of publishing and all of those kinds of things were operating. As libraries have gotten more invested in all of the different aspects of publishing, they're starting to understand the landscape. And I would say that they've got a linchpin view because they can see both sides of it now. And then they're able to help bridge some of the groups that otherwise would not be talking.
In a sense, you provided the bridging services for them. to get them connected with other
That's what
players.
Educopia is there for. And they operate as an affiliated community of Educopia now, but that's a very specific designation, and that's the way that the kind of programs of Educopia run. We have 3 of those. They're all autonomous to the degree that law provides. So we're the 501c3. Educopia provides the hosting apparatus for these communities, but all of the governance decision-making, all of the budgetary information, all of that is in their hands, and it's their decisions. And so they really are the drivers.
Essentially, you're forcing us you're putting us in a position of thinking globally, not locally.
I want people to think at the field level.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
The thing that has driven me crazy ever since I first stepped into this field in 99, 2000, while I was a graduate student, so I was seeing things from a very different perspective, graduate student in sociology and American studies, and it just drove me absolutely crazy to see how insular the views were for libraries, where they were looking very close. And then as I got to know some of the other players, each one of them were like looking at this little piece of it, and it's like, but wait, like if you just focus on your campus or your little piece on your little campus, then all of this is being given up. If we can all elevate our view and start thinking at that broader view, then we've got reasons to work together, and we can actually shape what we're going to be working in 20 years rather than having it shaped for us by external conditions.
You really can't see much from within the silo.
No.
You just,
Right. And if we can think together. Yeah.
Which is not comfortable.
No,
But it's
exactly.
Right.
So I was looking at the website for Educopia, and digital preservation is clearly on there as one of your interests, or one of Educopia's interests. So what do you think academic libraries, what is their role in that?
What should their role be, or what is their role right now?
It should be both.
Yeah,
That's
both.
that. Yes, exactly.
So I think that digital preservation. I'll rewind. I'll do another tangent, and I'll get back around to it. So. Digital preservation for me, 2004, was when we first got involved in digital preservation at Emory University. And the Meta Archive Cooperative, which is the affiliated community in Educopia, is an international network of players that literally embed the network infrastructure and the knowledge in all of their local institutions. So they run the network. We don't have physical servers, et cetera, at Educopia. I don't even have a physical office. I have a home office. But Meta Archive played at that kind of, disparate level. And one of the things that was crucial about that was, and a lot of the Educopia model has grown out of this experience, is that they needed to own it. They needed to feel that ownership and really participate in the process and know that they were in control of digital preservation, because nobody was taking responsibility for it. People were kind of talking around it from 1996 forward, especially after the Don Waters report. But digital preservation wasn't something that was actively being pursued, and if it was happening again at that local level.
Right.
So what I think that the libraries should be doing is bonding together and providing an infrastructure that serves more than the libraries, and then let that come back in and enrich and subsidize what needs to happen from the public good perspective for the libraries. And so when you think about something like Deepen, which I have high hopes for in the U.S. context, it's the Digital Preservation Network, and it was founded by a lot of higher-end libraries, and there are disparities, of course, in the academic library landscape. And what they founded it to do is provide heterogeneous storage, so binding together not just lots of different servers in different locations that back up the content and monitor it and do all of the types of things that you need to do in preservation, but also different systems, so that some of the kind of first generation of digital publishing or digital preservation, they're storing content in multiple of those, so that you really have like safeguard against safeguard against safeguard. It's great. In engineering terms, it's buying nines to kind of the highest level. That's great, but it's expensive as the devil, and no libraries have the budget to be able to actually afford that. But the libraries aren't the only group that needs it. So in 2004 or 2006, when we were founding Educopia, I remember trying to explain to our lawyers what we did, because they were helping us file the application and everything else. And it was just like, 2009, they called me and said, "Can you tell us a little bit more about this preservation network that you're running?"
From their own perspective.
Absolutely. And so
Interesting.
what I think the libraries should do, see, I just did it again, I'm coming back around. So what I think the libraries need to do is something that they do not do well, which is market how important this is and how good they are at it. We are way
talking
ahead.
about that earlier.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Marketing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, marketing is where we have failed more
Yes.
than anything else.
Exactly.
In the academic landscape and in all of the public good institutions. I think the museums are doing the best job of it. All of us could learn from the museums. But it is the single piece that I think is most important. And if we could talk about that digital preservation platform in a way that would relate to some other fields, certainly government agencies, which are under the same kind of White House rules that academic institutions are under, that is, forcing the issue forward at this point, because if you've got NSF funding or NIH funding or something else, you've got to be preserving the content that comes out of those. Those same enforcement rules are there for the federal agencies. Federal agencies need somebody. They don't necessarily want to go with a vendor. Why couldn't they come and be clients of the libraries? And so and then you can imagine other, not all groups, but other commercial groups, architects, or, various subsectors that could potentially feed into this. And then what that would do is, at the same time, it would elevate the image of the library in the public imagination, because everybody's hitting this now. People are losing their photo collections, and so there's this personal aspect to it, or they're losing the videos of their kids, whatever. If the libraries could step in and make that not about Amazon Cloud or Google Cloud or, Rackspace or, Backblaze, or, the different services that are being marketed commercially, but instead the library can do some of this for you and create some conduits for that and be the advisors and be the experts in this space. It'd be a game changer. Nobody knows how to take care of digital preservation the way that libraries do right now, and the libraries aren't doing it mainly because they lack the resources to do it. And so raising public awareness is one step in raising the resource levels to be able to do. So in a roundabout way, that's what I think the libraries should be doing.
And in a way, that's bringing back the whole marketing piece, because if you can do that, then you're raising awareness, and then marketing will take care of itself in essence.
Exactly. And I mean, one of the things I can remember back in 2006 when I was at NDIP meetings, the National Digital Information Infrastructure and Preservation Program, which I got really good at saying, which was a Library of Congress program, amazing funding stream for digital preservation research and application in the first generation. And I made this point in one of the first NDIP meetings: where's our marketing budget? Like, you guys have got to be talking about this. And one of the things that I said then, and I'll say again now, is if we actually mind our contacts, we all know people. We're all 2 or 3 steps removed from very famous people or well-positioned people, etc. And I'm sorry, there's nothing more apple pie than what libraries do. It would not be a big stretch to do something either on a Kickstarter level or, in some way to get together some public money
to get the funding
that would allow those people to speak on our behalf. And imagine the power that could, have to raise the level of consciousness in the public about what we're here to do and why we matter, and imagine the ripple effects that could actually have.
Yeah, it might actually encourage governments to increase funding to libraries.
That's right, because the public would demand it.
In your presentation, you contend, or you said, that scholarly communication is undergoing a system-wide change. Could you tell our viewers what you meant by that?
Yeah, so my background is sociology, and so I come at things with kind of a socio-historical lens. It's just the way that my brain works. It's the way that I see the world. And one of the things that sociology is very clear on at this point is that fields, systems, however you want to define it, but, operational spaces, so libraries or publishers or, the whole academic publishing system. These systems are formed in a way that promotes stasis, so that we know how we operate, and then we do according to those kind of rules and regulations that we set up for ourselves, many of which are informal. They're not, but they're enforced by behavioral activities throughout all of the players within the system. And so when you're in normal times, if there ever is such a thing, but most of the time, things will stay pretty close to where it is. Your isomorphism. I mean, you practice according to habit, and so whether you're talking about the journalism industry or the banking industry or any industry, the music industry, which is what I studied as a graduate student, wrote my dissertation on. these things organize not in permanent ways, but in inflexible ways for the most part. And then if you try to change that from one stakeholder perspective, it doesn't work. The change doesn't get reinforced by the other players in the system. So imagine, in the music industry, imagine just having, a set of people who decide, oh, we really want to do X in one industry space. That's not going to have a ripple effect around, no matter how good the innovation is, no matter, unless there's a reason for everybody else to kind of buy in and participate in it. So the game change moments open up when you have changes in technology. We've got those in plenitude right now. Political changes, which we also, when you think about, coming back to that public good piece, the public good has fallen way out of favor, and not just in the U.S. context, it's happening across the Western world. And there's more and more concentration economically. That's another really big factor. There are these things that when all of those pressure points kind of align and get pushed at once, there's an opening, there's a space, and there's the opportunity to change. And we can predict when those moments happen. We can't predict what's going to happen in them, but we can predict when those moments happen, and I think we're in one of those right now. We've got too many pressure points in the system of academic publishing for things to continue the way that they are. And we've been seeing the friction, the gears aren't moving smoothly anymore, but the friction is very real, and there are a lot of vested interests that go in very, very different directions. And so we can either let that, tension continue to happen, and things will break, and pieces of it will go, and change will happen, and it will eventually hit another stasis point. We can let that happen naturally. I don't think that tends to yield the best results, or we can try to kind of inform the direction it takes. And the only way to inform that direction, which sociology also is very, very clear on, is by building networks that involve all of the players, so that you get the reception of the idea. The network takes that forward and actually makes it happen. And so aligning the interests of the stakeholders is absolutely crucial in this moment if we want to actually define where we want to go. And I think there's so much at stake, especially with the atmosphere becoming more commercially, academic landscape in general. Take North Carolina right now as a prime example. My home state, my husband's a professor in the system, and they just had a coup. A huge coup. The Board of Governors ousted a wonderful president, in my opinion. And then 2 days before the state Senate would have closed the loophole, the state Senate, which is very Tea Party, very heavily Republican, even they didn't like what the Board of Governors was about to do, and they were trying to close the loophole. And in backdoor conversations, in the middle of the night, the Board of Governors announced who their new hire is, who is the educational secretary that served under Bush, and who invented No Child Left Behind, and who has no academic training, no academic credentials, and really her only interest in the academic system is to be its gutter, and she's going to gut that system. And I use that as a prime example right now because we're living it. But Wisconsin, Texas, Pennsylvania, you can see this playing out in lots of different states in different ways, and the public education is experiencing it first, but higher ed itself is already under this intense commercialization. There's kind of a commodification of that process. And then you look at the publishing environment and you ask, okay, so what happens if scholarly inquiry is directed by commercial interests instead of being directed by academic interests, which have always been not anti-commercial, but just beyond commercial, because it's about the dissemination of knowledge. It's about learning new things and exploring new things. If both the academic publishing, which I would say is the heart of how information gets from scholar to scholar and from scholars to the rest of the world in an ideal universe, which doesn't happen very effectively right now. It's one of the things that's broken in our system, and it's one of the reasons that the public doesn't care very much about higher ed right now, is because we've been very closed. But if academic publishing starts to operate on a more commercial model, in the sense that what we're aiming for, what we're gearing towards is good sales, then a lot of the scholarship that I care the most about, and a lot of the scholarship that really has the potential to eventually be game-changing, just isn't even going to be able to exist in that world. And so the stakes are extremely high. I think academic publishing has a responsibility right now as a subfield of the academy to try to maintain some sort of eye on the prize, that we all, no matter where we're from, I mean, nobody enters publishing to be evil. Like it's really not one of those areas you go into because you want to get rich, even in the commercial industry. That's not the point. The point is you care about information and you care about people writing about things and thinking about things. And so figuring out how to use that as a lever to bring all of the different stakeholders back together, because not doing so is so dramatically dangerous in this moment of time is the trick.
Well, you mentioned we're kind of at a critical moment. I think you highlighted that in your talk.
Absolutely.
And to really get through it and to do the things that you're talking about, it sounds like we need to break away from our institutional silos, as it were, build these bridges. And so, is that a fair assessment of what
Absolutely,
where we are?
Absolutely. That's the first and foremost.
Okay.
Yeah.
What can libraries do to make this happen? And I would also ask the question, what can publishers do? What can content providers, other content providers, what can authors do?
What can librarians do?
What can librarians do? Every single one of us has a responsibility to get involved. And getting involved doesn't mean thinking just locally. It means elevating our perspective so that we're really thinking about what we're doing in the context of what's happening at the field level. And if we could make that shift, and it's a monumental shift, I mean, it's a philosophical shift in the way that we would look at things in most campus environments. I mean, we are hired by our institution. We are working within the constraints of that institution. It's very hard to get out of that and look up and look out and go, oh, but wait a second, all of this is going to impact where I'm going to be, and it's that all of us need to get better at doing. And I think there are already some resources out there to help with that. I think that one of the things that could be really important in the academic library side of this is leadership training. There are lots and lots of leadership training programs already, and we're doing a project right now, so this is a little bit self-serving, but it's a project that we're hosting on behalf of a cluster of leadership programs that serve the academic libraries, public libraries, also the museums and the archives. And what we're talking about is planting marketing messages, in essence. We're not calling it that. But how do you work with policy? How do you start to see at that field level? How do you start to talk about that, whether you're at the top level of administration or whether you're a new hire? How do you make that relevant to your day-to-day work in such a way that we do start to knit together as a community in this more overarching way? And it's a mindset change, and it's a dramatic one. And I think if we could embed some of that in continuing ed, that's one space that can start to have an impact. If we can embed that in the societies and other associations that serve the space, that's another really important, point, that if that's the message that they're getting from their society heads, if that's something that's talked about regularly, then we do start to raise our consciousness. And I think it's a process. It's going to be a process.
How would you embed it with publishers? Because they've got profit motives, they've got competition.
Absolutely.
Some of them have shareholders.
Absolutely. So
how do you embed this kind of a change of, in a sense, a cultural perspective, if you will?
Right.
How do you embed that, or how do you move in that direction?
Well, I think the commercial publishers actually have more incentives than the libraries do. So the libraries are still embedded within an institutional infrastructure that they can't imagine ever actually changing. So when I talk to librarians, they're not worried that their library is going to be closed tomorrow. When I talk to a publisher, they're worried.
Yeah.
They're either worried at the commercial level because most of the time their parent organization is not a publisher, right? A lot of the conglomerates have lots and lots of different vested interests, and this is one small one, and they're trying to stay alive within that industry. And then the university presses, good Lord. I mean, look at how many of them have already gone under, and they all know that they're under threat, with the exception of, kind of the top ones that operate in a more commercial fashion. All of them are struggling for the same reason that we've been struggling since the 60s. We've had more and more content and less market to buy the content. And so this spiral that has happened, which we call the serials crisis, and the big deal was supposed to fix, instead of fixing it, it kind of delayed the inevitable. But the game hasn't changed.
Yeah.
The fundamental piece is still there, which is there is more content, we have more supply and less demand, and that hits everybody. So the commercial entities are not immune from that. And if we can talk about that and talk about that in the context of a changing academy where it is growing more commercial and the implications of that for the business models that folks are working with, I think that resonates. And I think, all we have to do is look at one of the biggest in the space, Elsevier, and what they're doing right now, and not in a bad way, but they're smart. They've got some very, very smart people. They hire incredible people. I love some of the people that I know from Elsevier. And their business model is no longer going to be relying on libraries. They're not talking to the libraries exclusively anymore. They're going to the presidents and provosts, and they're going to the research centers on the campuses, and they've been doing this for about a year and a half now. It's a very strategic move on their part, and they're looking at data and how can we help the institutions, that higher ed, at the higher level, not at the library, because the library is dry. That well is pretty much run dry. So now what happens if we get into academic analytic information and start helping the campus to deal with data? And that's a really, really smart business move on their part. All of the other publishers should be running scared right now of what happens if one publisher becomes one data aggregator. They're big incentives, and then honestly, Elsevier itself should be scared of that world because it's not the world they want to live in either. These are not people who don't care about scholarly inquiry. And so really thinking through that and talking through it in a way that's not accusatory. It's not, it can't be us against them. If it's us against them, we're already dead before we're out of the starting gate. If we can find just enough, we're not going to be utopian, but if we can find just enough of an interest in common and figure out how to quantify measurable ways of getting to that goal and then align our activities towards that goal, then we might actually have a prayer of doing something useful with academic inquiry and where it's going over the next 20 years. If we don't do that, every single player that exists in the system right now is endangered, Elsevier included. So, not to call out, I feel bad, but all of them.
So I have multiple questions, actually. So who do you think should take the leadership role, and what would be the first steps? And what do you think the resulting system-wide model will look like? And then also, how would data analytics play into that?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. So I don't think there's any single entity that can lead this forward. I think it's got to come from lots of different communities. And the way that I look at system change in general, and then system change in this atmosphere in particular, is if you can find the thought leaders, and they're embedded all over the place. They're not all in, I wish they were all in higher administration. It might be a very different field if they were. But if you can find the thought leaders, and it's the connectors. There's a blanking on his name, and I'm blanking on the name of the book. It was a really, really big deal a couple of years ago. What is that? It basically distilled out some sociological principles and talked about how they apply in business and how to push things over the line. How do you? I can't even remember the buzzword. That's terrible. But in any case, you need connectors. The only thing that really matters in landscapes in the end are the networks that we form. Right. And there are certain linchpin people who, regardless of where they may be positioned, have really strong voices that carry. And so part of it is finding and empowering those people. And then the other part of it is having something that is neutral enough at the center that provides some glue and some backbone. And that can be a diverse backbone. It doesn't have to be one organization. It can be a number of organizations that come together and agree on, we're going to play this neutral role and just help to network everybody else together. That group has to have no vested stake. It can't want one thing or the other as the outcome. It has to be willing to play according to the players. And I think we've got some examples of things like that. I think NISO does a good bit of that in the U.S. context. I think that there are other organizations as well, and it's certainly the model that Educopia is trying to put forward in a very small way. This would be a much bigger thing.
Now, in your presentation, you mentioned a project, Project Meerkat. Is that an attempt to do what you're talking about?
A little bit. It's an attempt to do one piece of it, and I think there are going to have to be a lot of initiatives stakeholders that line up and try to do this in different spaces. What Meerkat would do, so we're talking about, and this is just in the vetting period, so this is not even a full-fledged proposal yet. It is an outline and an idea. But what it would aim to do is three main things. It would aim to set up a cooperative structure that might be an organization, it might not. I'm not sure how to describe it without having all of the stakeholders at the table defining it, but something that is glue and that's governance, that holds the community of stakeholders together, including the publishers, the libraries, the aggregators, the analysts, the authors. I mean, there are so many different players that need to be represented in this mix, and something that neutralizes that enough so that we can trust each other. You have to have an environment that cultivates trust and then reinforces it, right? And so that cooperative infrastructure is a big piece of the project. Like, how do we set that up? How do we empower voices to make decisions, and how does that get governed, and how do we make it as transparent as it needs to be, et cetera? So that's one piece of it.
That's another
transparency is so
exactly,
huge.
because you can't build trust without transparency.
Nope, you sure can't. And so if we can do that piece at the same time as we're also building a model for usage data, so, and starting with one piece of the scholarly enterprise, monographs, which are understudied. A lot of the analytics that are done right now are not done on that piece. Counter's starting to do some. I mean, there are some programs and some projects that are starting to approach that issue, but nobody's invested a lot in it, in part because there's not money in the market, right? So it's not, the journals are where most of this is happening. But monographs are really interesting because nobody has a large control of the market. There's no big player. It looks like a donut when you look at monograph publishing, because you've got so many publishers and they all have like 3% or less. Right. There's nobody with like 15% of the market, which means that all of them can be incentivized to work together in order to understand where usage data is aggregated. They all need each other, in essence, in order to understand the whole, and you can't understand your own impact unless you can measure that against the whole. So a piece of this would be that kind of usage model and usage data model for both gathering the data, so where can we get this from, where, what does it mean, how do we modify, how do we map it together so that it makes sense? Those are like dense questions. It's hard, but we do hard things all the time. I mean, it's not impossible. It's just hard. And then the third piece, and the most crucial, and it's the heart of that project, is a code of ethics. And I don't use that term lightly. I think that data ethics are a very, very big issue, and we are completely ignoring it right now. There are small projects, again, and small groups that are talking about this, and are talking about the implications of the use of data for scholarly inquiry, but it's happening in small pockets in lots of different places, and those groups are competing instead of aligning, and that's dangerous, so that you're going to wind up with like 10 principled statements out there that may all be great, but nobody's going to follow them because they haven't decided it together. Right. You've got to bring the whole community together to do that. And so working out some of those initial questions around what gets gathered, what gets shared, how that gets shared, how much PII is there, how much of the personally identifying information is there, and how much do we need to let other people know what that PII is and how it's being used. So one of the other problems here is that for the users, both the readers and the authors, they're not even aware of how much of their activity is already being captured. Correct. And that's a problem. Yeah. They need to be aware. We're not going to stop the tide. I mean, there was a talk about this that I got to see a piece of before I came over here. We're not going to be able to stop the data flow that is already in existence at this point. We can change people's awareness of what it is, and we can change the ways in which it is used if we're willing to think about it and actually look at it, instead of just, oh, well, I need to catalog today. I'm a metadata librarian. That's not my problem. And that's where getting to the field level and starting to understand how much this is going to impact everything we're doing is necessary. And this is one very small project idea. It's we're talking about seed funding it from the community at $5,000 or $1,000 a piece, so that there are some low barriers to entry for almost any player, and have some other ways to bring people in advisory roles, so that if they can't afford to be there but need to be there, they're still there. And do it as a seed-funded 3-year initiative that costs less than $500,000. And then once you've got that nexus together, that's powerful. And the other thing that should be a motivator for those who come to this table is that there are going to be R&D dollars that can come out of this, because all of the funders are going to want to get behind this if they see that the community's actually coming together. They're actually grappling with it. Okay, now we know. Let's come in and fund this piece over here, where the publishers are working on this piece, and maybe the aggregators are working on this piece, and we know all of those investments are actually going to achieve something, because instead of competing, they're aligning, and the investment at the end of the day multiplies. I mean, it basically, it makes it worth so much more than if you've got a few pennies over here, or a lot of pennies over here, and a lot of pennies over here that go in different directions, and there's no way for it to fuse and actually take hold.
Well, I think new ways of funding are going to be critical.
Imperative.
And concerns about privacy, as you mentioned earlier, it's
huge.
It can be pretty shocking as to how exposed so many people are.
Yeah, all of us are.
So can you predict how this is going to end?
No.
Or no?
No.
Or are you? I was going to say,
that's the fun of it, right? I mean, who knows?
I'm sitting here thinking and listening to everything that you're saying, and it sounds like it's all worthwhile and it's doable, but it sounds so time-consuming, which is fine. Except I'm wondering, do we have enough time?
Yeah.
That's my concern.
I think we can't not have enough time. I think that the issue is so important that if we don't take the time, and we don't, I mean, nobody's got the time for anything. We're all working, the equivalent of about 4 jobs in one, because of the way that the resource, the recession was not a pleasant thing to be going through over the last decade. And so everybody feels like they're already stretched to the nth degree. But again, if we can't get out of that individualized and institutionalized perspective and look at this from a field lens, then that's not going to get better. And if we do look at it from that level, then we can actually shape where we're going. And at that point, there is a way out someday. And the key here is going to be figuring out how to get that message across in a way that doesn't just hit for a few minutes like it might have this morning, or like it might when people are watching this, but it actually resonates and then gets backed up by action. And that's the moving from, kind of talk about something to actual action. And it happens.
That was actually part of my other question that I didn't really get to say when I was asking you about leadership. Like, what are the first steps? Like, how do we get the momentum going?
Right.
Like, how do we do the actions?
Right. And I think, the first thing is building the community. So if we can pull together people, and again, I think this happens in multiple arenas at the same time. And I think that the societies and the associations that are already leaders and kind of bridge points for large portions of the field, I think that they're linchpins in this. I think that they don't talk to each other, which is theater of the absurd. Like they've thought of each other as competitors for too long, or as just not relevant. And if they can start to understand the relevance that they have to each other, and I think that's already starting to take place. We see lots of cross-sector explorations going on, and it's a matter of reaching that next level. And I think the only way to do that is to beat the drum a bit. And that's what we're trying to do with the publishing analytics data trust.
Right.
That's really the end goal of Project Meerkat, is catalyzing some activity and really trying to bridge players.
Building those bridges.
Because those relationships are what's going to change the system.
Okay.
Yeah.